My grandson unplugged my oxygen and said, "You're just taking up space." I stayed quiet. By Monday, he couldn't access any of my accounts and never heard from me again. I'm Margaret, and at 75, I never thought I'd be sharing my life's deepest betrayal on the internet. But here I am on a quiet Tuesday morning in my new assisted living apartment watching the sun warm the garden outside, and I finally feel ready to tell my story. It's a messy one, full of love, a whole lot of misguided trust, and ultimately a quiet kind of peace I never expected to find. This isn't a tale of grand adventure or dramatic heroism. It's about a small, insidious rot that grew within my own family, nurtured by entitlement and a shocking lack of empathy, until it almost consumed me. It's about a grandson I adored, a son I raised with all my heart, and the $12,000 that ripped away the illusion of family. It all started really after my heart surgery 3 months ago. The doctor, a kind young man with tired eyes, told David, my son, that I needed supervision during recovery. David, bless his heart, insisted I stay with him and his family. "Mom, your family." He'd set his voice warm with what I genuinely believed was concern. "We'll take care of you." That was the hook, you see. That comforting, familiar phrase, "We'll take care of you." It resonated deep in my bones, the promise of safety and love. I pictured cozy evenings, shared meals, the gentle hum of family life. Oh, how wrong I was. Their house, a sprawling suburban home David and Linda had worked so hard for, felt different than it used to. When I visited for holidays, it was always buzzing with laughter, the smell of Linda's famous apple pie, the joyful chaos of my two grandkids, Tyler and his younger sister Sarah, tearing through the living room. But this time the laughter was forced, brittle, like dry leaves underfoot. Conversations would just stop when I entered a room, leaving an awkward silence that stretched thick in the air. Tyler, my 25-year-old grandson, would roll his eyes if I asked for help, reaching something on a high shelf, muttering under his breath about old people problems. His girlfriend Jessica, a girl with bleached blonde hair and a permanent smirk, never bothered to hide her disdain from the couch, her eyes flicking over me like I was a piece of unwanted furniture. David worked long hours at his construction company, leaving before dawn and returning utterly exhausted, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. When he was home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone or speaking in hushed, urgent tones with Linda about bills and mortgages. I saw the stress lines etching deeper around his eyes, the way he'd absent-mindedly rub his temples. I tried to make myself useful despite the oxygen tube that trailed behind me like a tether to life itself, a constant gentle hiss in the background. I'd fold laundry, prepare simple meals, anything to prove I wasn't just a burden, not just taking up space and resources. But Tyler made it clear nothing I did mattered. "Why don't you just go to one of those nursing homes?" he'd asked one evening, his voice dripping with casual indifference. Linda was at her book club, David working late. I was in what had become my chair, the oxygen concentrator humming beside me, a faithful, comforting companion. "You'd have people your own age there. Professional care." I looked at him, this young man I'd bounced on my knee, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose elementary school plays I'd clapped for. "I like being with family," I said quietly, my voice a little reedy. Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just a cold, dismissive sound. "Family, right." He didn't even look up from his phone. "You know how much those machines cost to run? The electricity bill went up $60 last month." $60. My ability to breathe, to simply exist, was worth $60 to him. The comment stung, a sharp, unexpected jab. But I said nothing. I'd learned over the years that sometimes silence was the only response to cruelty. Tyler, I now realize, took my quiet as weakness, not wisdom. He saw an old woman, frail and dependent, not a person with a lifetime of experiences. A person who had once held him, loved him, and imagined a bright future for him. He saw a wallet, a burden, a ticking clock, counting down to an inheritance. That Sunday, the day my world truly fractured, started like any other. Linda had gone to her sister's house, David was outside wrestling with a stubborn engine part on his truck, a symphony of grunts and curses drifting in through the open window. Tyler and Jessica were sprawled on the living room couch, absorbed in something on his laptop, their voices, a low murmur. I was in my chair, lost in a library book, the familiar scent of old paper a small comfort. Then a fragment of conversation pierced through my quiet, raising the fine hairs on my arms. "I'm telling you, Grandma's gotta have money stashed away somewhere." Tyler was saying, his voice low, but not low enough to hide from the woman he was discussing. "She owned that house for 40 years. Even if Dad thinks she spent it all, there's got to be something left." Jessica twirled a strand of her bleached hair around her finger, a bored expression on her face. "Maybe she's hiding it. Old people do that, right? Don't trust banks." My hands tightened on my book, knuckles white, but I kept my eyes fixed on the page, willing myself to be invisible. "My dad's too nice to ask her about it directly." Tyler continued, his voice taking on a speculative edge. "But when she's gone, we'll figure it out. The will reading will be interesting." They were talking about my death, you see, with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather or a package delivery. They were impatiently awaiting. "How much longer?" As if I were an expiring product. "How much longer do you think?" Jessica asked, her tone flat, devoid of any genuine curiosity or concern. Tyler shrugged, a sickeningly casual gesture. "Heart surgery at her age. Could be any time, especially with all those breathing problems." It was at that precise moment that the machine started beeping. My oxygen concentrator. It had been acting up all week occasionally, making strange wheezing noises before settling back into its normal rhythm. I'd mentioned it to David, but he'd brushed it off, saying we'd deal with it Monday. The beeping grew more insistent, a frantic, high-pitched whine that cut through the air. My breathing became labored, a desperate gulping for air that felt increasingly thin. I reached for the controls, my fingers clumsy and thick with a sudden growing panic. "Tyler." I called, my voice barely above a whisper, ragged and weak. "Could you help me with this?" He looked over, saw me struggling with the machine, and something shifted in his expression. Not concern. Not compassion. Something darker, colder. He stood up slowly, deliberately. He walked over to where I sat, and without a word, without a shred of hesitation, he reached behind the machine and unplugged it from the wall. The humming stopped. The flowing oxygen stopped. The room fell into a silence so profound I could hear Jessica's shallow breathing from the couch. My own lungs burned, screaming for air that wasn't coming. "Let's see if your generation can still breathe." Tyler said, his voice calm and cold as a winter morning, his eyes meeting mine. I stared at him, this young man I'd once held as a baby, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose birthday parties I'd helped plan, whose every whim I'd tried to indulge. The oxygen tube felt heavy in my nose, delivering nothing but empty air. I could have screamed. I could have called for David, who was just outside. I could have begged. Instead, I looked directly into Tyler's eyes and saw something that chilled me more than the lack of oxygen ever could. I saw a stranger. I saw someone who would watch me die without a single moment of regret. The moment stretched between us, taut and suffocating like a wire. Jessica, I noticed, had gone completely still on the couch, her phone forgotten in her lap. Even she seemed to understand that something irreversible had just happened. But I didn't panic. Maybe it was the lack of oxygen. A strange kind of clarity that sets in when your body is fighting for survival. Or maybe it was something deeper, a final breaking point in my spirit. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't just about my breathing. This was about something much more fundamental. This was about respect. About love. About what family was supposed to mean. And as I sat there looking at my grandson's cold, calculating face, I realized that the family I thought I had was as much of an illusion as the oxygen I was no longer receiving. Tyler, seemingly satisfied with his monstrous point, reached down and plugged the machine back in. The humming resumed. Oxygen began flowing again. But something inside me had changed forever. "Just checking if it was working properly," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you, Grandma. I nodded slowly, my breathing gradually returning to normal. But my mind was racing, processing what had just occurred with the sharp, almost painful focus that comes from nearly losing everything. Tyler had shown me exactly who he was. And more importantly, he'd shown me exactly what I needed to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what Tyler had done with the oxygen, though that was certainly terrifying. No, I couldn't sleep because of what I'd seen in his eyes when he did it. The complete absence of remorse. The chilling, calculating coldness of someone who had already written me off. I lay in the guest bedroom listening to the house settle around me. David and Linda's muffled voices carried through the thin walls discussing something in urgent whispers. I caught fragments: bills. Mortgage. Can't keep this up much longer. Money troubles. That explained the tension I'd been sensing for weeks, the way David's shoulders sagged Linda's nervous energy. Around 2 a.m, I heard Tyler's bedroom door creak open. Footsteps padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. I waited a few minutes, then carefully made my way out of bed, dragging my oxygen tank behind me as quietly as possible. The wheels, a faint, persistent whisper on the hardwood. The house was dark, save for a pale blue glow emanating from the kitchen. Tyler sat at the breakfast table, laptop open, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. I stayed in the shadows of the doorway watching. Even from a distance, I could see what he was doing. Online gambling. The screen showed cards, chips, spinning wheels. His fingers moved frantically across the keyboard, placing bet after bet. I watched him lose what looked like hundreds of dollars in minutes, his jaw clenching tighter with each loss. Then he pulled out a credit card. My credit card. The one I'd given David access to for emergencies. The one that was supposed to help with household expenses while I stayed there. Tyler typed in the numbers with practiced ease, like he'd done it many times before. $1,000. Then another $500 when he lost that. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't the first time he'd used my card. I backed away slowly, returning to my room with my heart pounding harder than it had during the oxygen incident. My own grandson was stealing from me, had been stealing from me for weeks, maybe months. And David either didn't know or, worse, was letting it happen. The thought twisted in my gut, a bitter, sour taste. The next morning, I called my bank from the privacy of the guest room bathroom. The porcelain cool against my arm. Linda was at work. David was outside, the distant sound of his truck. A familiar comfort that now felt like a cruel irony. The customer service representative's voice was kind but professional as she pulled up my account. Mrs. Patterson, you've had quite a bit of activity on your card recently. Online gaming sites, mostly. The charges total about $12,000 over the past 3 months. $12,000. My hands shook as I gripped the phone. Can you tell me the dates of these charges? She read them off, a dispassionate litany of betrayal. Every single one corresponded to a night when I'd thought Tyler was just staying up late watching movies or playing video games. Every time David and Linda had gone to bed early, trusting their son to behave responsibly in the house with his grandmother. Ma'am, if these charges weren't authorized by you, we can start a fraud investigation immediately. I closed my eyes, feeling the immense weight of the decision. Not yet. I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Let me handle this first. That afternoon, when Tyler came home from whatever job he was pretending to look for, I was waiting in the living room. My oxygen concentrator hummed beside me, a soft, ironic reminder of my supposed helplessness. Tyler, honey, could you sit with me for a minute? He looked annoyed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. But he dropped onto the couch. What's up, Grandma? I feigned a hesitant, confused, elderly tone. I was wondering if you could help me understand something. I got my bank statement today, and there are some charges I don't remember making. His face didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense, a subtle flicker of unease. Old people forget stuff all the time, he said too quickly. Maybe you bought something online and forgot about it. Maybe, I said gently, my gaze unwavering. But these charges are to gambling sites. I've never gambled online in my life. The silence stretched between us thick and uncomfortable. Tyler's legs started bouncing, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "That's weird," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Identity theft, probably. Happens all the time to older people." I nodded as if that made perfect sense. "You're probably right. I should call the bank and report it as fraud then." Wait, the word came out sharper, more urgent than he'd intended. "I mean, maybe don't do that right away. Sometimes these things work themselves out." Work themselves out? Tyler ran a hand through his hair, and for a fleeting moment he looked like the confused little boy I remembered. But only for a moment. "Look, Grandma. I borrowed some money. I was going to pay it back before you noticed." Borrowed. As if taking someone's credit card without permission was borrowing. "How much money, Tyler?" "Not that much, like maybe a couple thousand. I hit a rough patch, but I've got some job interviews lined up. I'll pay it back next month." I looked at my grandson, this young man I'd loved unconditionally for 25 years, and saw a stranger, not just because he'd stolen from me, but because he was lying to my face without a trace of shame, without a hint of remorse. $12,000. I said quietly, letting the number hang in the air like a guillotine. His face went white. That's not. I mean, some of those charges might not be mine. More Lee's. Always more Lee's." "Tyler, where's your father?" "At work." "Why? Does he know about this?" Tyler's eyes darted toward the door, then back to me, trapped. "Know about what? Does your father know you've been using my credit card to gamble online?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Tyler's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. That's when I heard David's truck pull into the driveway. Tyler's face went from white to green. "Please don't tell him," Tyler whispered, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he sounded genuinely afraid. "He'll kill me. I'm already on thin ice with him about the job thing." I watched my son walk through the front door, tool belt still around his waist, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He smiled when he saw me, that same warm smile he'd had as a little boy, innocent and hopeful. "Hey, Mom. How was your day?" I looked at Tyler, who was staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes, a silent plea for complicity in his deceit. Then I looked at David, my son, who was working himself to death, trying to keep his family afloat, who had taken me in when I needed help, who trusted his son to be decent. "It was fine, honey. Just fine." Tyler's shoulders sagged with relief, a visible release of tension. But I wasn't done. "David, could you sit down for a minute? I'd like to talk to you and Tyler about something important." David's smile faded. He knew that tone. Every parent knows that tone. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice wary. I took a deep breath, feeling the oxygen flow steadily into my lungs, a silent act of defiance against the cruelty I'd faced. "I think it's time we discussed some financial arrangements." For everyone's benefit. Tyler's relief evaporated. He knew just as I did that everything was about to change. The conversation didn't go the way I expected. It went worse. David listened in stunned silence as I explained about the credit card charges. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally a simmering anger that made his hands clench into fists. Tyler sat beside him, shrinking smaller with each word. I spoke a pathetic huddle of shame. $12,000. David's voice was barely controlled, a low growl. "Tyler, is this true, Dad? I can explain." "Is it true?" Tyler nodded miserably. "But I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay it back." David stood up so fast his chair rocked backward. "How, you don't have a job? You've been looking for 8 months now." He turned to me, his face flushed with embarrassment, with a new kind of pain. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We'll figure out how to pay you back every penny." That's when Tyler said the words that changed everything, the words that shattered the last remnants of my illusion. "Why does it even matter? She's loaded, and when she dies, we get it all anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the oxygen concentrator seemed to quiet its humming. David stared at his son like he'd never seen him before, a dawning horror in his eyes. "What did you just say?" Tyler realized his mistake immediately. A frantic scramble to retrieve the words. But it was too late. The truth was already hanging in the air between us, undeniable and ugly. "I didn't mean, I just meant that Grandma has money and we're family." So, so, so you think you can steal from her because she's going to die?" David's voice was deadly quiet, now colder than I'd ever heard it. "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." I watched this exchange feeling oddly detached, like I was observing a play rather than living through it. This was my family, my son and grandson, discussing my death and my money as if I weren't sitting right there breathing thanks to a machine and listening. "Mom." David turned to me, his voice thick with shame, with a desperate plea for understanding. "I don't know what to say. This is not how I raised him." But even as he apologized, I could see something else in David's eyes. Calculation. The same look Tyler had when he was gambling a weighing of odds. David was already thinking about how to handle this, how to manage the situation. Not how to make it right, but how to control the damage to minimize the impact on his life, on his son's life. "The important thing is that we're family." David continued, his voice regaining some of its earlier warmth. A false note. "We'll work this out together. Tyler will get a job. We'll set up a payment plan." "Will we?" I asked quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. David blinked, caught off guard. "Of course, Mom. You're family. We take care of each other." Family. That word again. The word they used like a magic spell that was supposed to make everything acceptable, to excuse every transgression. "David, can I ask you something, anything? If Tyler had stolen $12,000 from a stranger, what would you tell him to do?" David's mouth opened, then closed. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's different, Mom. This is family." "Is it different? The money is gone either way. The betrayal happened either way. But we'll pay you back." David's face flushed deeper. I could see him struggling, caught between his loyalty to his son and his knowledge that what Tyler had done was wrong, truly wrong. "With what money? You just told Tyler you're barely keeping up with your own bills." That's when I realized something that broke my heart more than Tyler's theft ever could. David was going to choose Tyler. He was going to find a way to minimize this, to make excuses to protect his son from the consequences of his actions, just like he'd been doing Tyler's whole life. "Mom," David said carefully, his voice laced with the tone of a man trying to placate a difficult elder. "I know you're upset. You have every right to be, but Tyler's going through a rough patch. He made a mistake, but he's still my son. He's still your grandson." There it was. The choice had been made. Tyler could steal from me, could unplug my oxygen machine, could wish for my death, and David would still protect him. Because that's what fathers do, right? Protect their children no matter what. Even if it means sacrificing their mothers. I stood up slowly, my oxygen tank rolling behind me with a soft whir its presence. A stark reminder of my vulnerability, and yet paradoxically, my strength. "I think I need some air." "Mom, wait. I just need to think, David. This is a lot to process." I walked outside to the small patio behind the house where David kept his tools and Linda grew her tomatoes. The evening air was cool against my face, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic from David's truck. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in through my nose tube, letting the chill clear my head. Behind me, I could hear David's voice through the sliding door, low and urgent. "How could you be so stupid? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tyler's response was muffled, but I caught the tone, defensive, unrepentant. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Harrison and Associates, how may I help you? This is Margaret Patterson. I need to speak with Charles Harrison immediately." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but Mr. Harrison is with a client." Can I take a message? Tell him it's about updating my will. I said, my voice firm, clear. Tell him it's urgent. Charles had been my lawyer for 30 years. He'd handled my late husband Robert's estate, helped me with the sale of our house, guided me through every major financial decision I'd made since Robert died. He knew exactly how much money I had. And he knew how I'd planned to leave it. His voice came on the line 2 minutes later, a little breathless. Mrs. Patterson. What's this about updating your will, Charles? I said, my voice calm, almost detached. I need to make some changes. Significant changes, of course. Would you like to schedule an appointment for next week? I'd like to schedule it for tomorrow morning. And Charles, I need you to prepare some other documents as well. I'm going to need a new bank account, new credit cards, and I want to explore options for assisted living facilities. There was a pause, a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Margaret, is everything all right? I looked back through the sliding door where David was pacing, and Tyler sat slumped in his chair like a scolded, petulant child. Everything is about to be much better, Charles. Much better. The next morning, I told David I was going to the doctor for a routine checkup. Linda offered to drive me, but I insisted on calling a taxi. I needed to handle this alone, without their watchful eyes, without their attempts to smooth things over. Charles's office hadn't changed in the 30 years I'd been coming there. Same heavy wooden desk, same worn leather chairs, same comforting smell of old books and legal documents. But I felt different sitting across from him. Stronger somehow, despite the oxygen tube in my nose. I want to change my will, I said without preamble. I want to remove David and Tyler as beneficiaries. Charles set down his pen slowly, his brow furrowed. Margaret, that's a significant decision. Are you sure you want to do this? I told him everything. The oxygen incident. The stolen money, Tyler's casual comment about my death. David's willingness to excuse it all away. When I finished, Charles was quiet for a long moment, simply nodding, his expression grave. What do you want to do with your estate instead? I want to donate most of it to charity. The American Heart Association, maybe organizations that help elderly people who've been abused by their families. And the rest, I have a niece in Oregon, Sarah. She calls me every Christmas and sends me pictures of her children. She doesn't know how much money I have, and she's never asked for anything. Charles nodded, making notes, his pen scratching quietly on the legal pad. And what about your current living situation? I want to look at assisted living communities. Good ones. Places where I'll be treated with dignity and respect. This will take a few days to arrange properly, he cautioned. I understand, but Charles, I want new bank accounts opened immediately. I want my credit cards canceled and new ones issued, and I don't want anyone else to have access to my finances. What about your current account? The one your son has access to for household expenses. I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine, truly my own. Leave enough in there to cover this month's expenses. After that, they're on their own. As I left Charles's office that afternoon, a lightness settled over me, something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Not from my oxygen tank or my health problems, but from the crushing burden of pretending that family loyalty was more important than basic human decency. Tyler thought he was waiting for me to die so he could inherit my money. Instead, he was about to discover what it felt like to lose something he'd never actually had. The changes happened gradually, so subtly that no one noticed at first. That was exactly how I planned it. On Tuesday, I visited Sunset Manor, a beautiful assisted living community about 40 minutes from David's house. The director, a warm woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a gentle smile, gave me a complete tour, private apartments with full kitchenettes, a dining room that served meals, restaurant-style activity coordinators, a medical staff, on-site 24 hours a day, and most importantly, a clear policy of treating residents with dignity and respect. We have an apartment available next month, Patricia told me as we sat in her office, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. It has a lovely view of the garden, and it's already equipped for residents who need oxygen support. I'll take it, I said without hesitation, the words feeling right solid. Don't you want to discuss it with your family first? I looked out the window at the garden she'd mentioned where several residents sat on benches reading or chatting quietly. They looked peaceful, content. Safe. No, I said, a quiet resolve in my voice. This decision is mine. On Wednesday, my new bank accounts were active. Charles had arranged everything with military precision. My old account, the one David had access to, was left with exactly enough to cover the month's household expenses. Everything else had been transferred to accounts that only I could access. On Thursday, I started quietly moving my personal belongings. Nothing obvious, just a few photo albums, some jewelry, clothes I particularly liked. I told Linda I was donating old things to charity, and she was so busy with her own life, so caught up in the whirl of school drop-offs and yoga classes and volunteer work, that she barely looked at what I was taking. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed to think our conversation had blown over. He was back to his usual routine of sleeping late, playing video games, and treating me like furniture. He'd even made a few more attempts to use my credit card only to have them declined. He assumed it was a temporary banking issue, a glitch in the system. The entitlement was so deep he couldn't even conceive that I would do something to protect myself from him. Friday morning, while David was at work and Linda was at her yoga class, Tyler finally confronted me about the card problems. "Grandma, something's wrong with your credit card. I tried to buy groceries yesterday and it wouldn't work." I looked up from my book, feigning innocence. "Oh, did you try calling the bank?" "Yeah, they said the card was canceled. They wouldn't tell me why." "How strange," I said mildly, turning a page. "Maybe it expired." Tyler's eyes narrowed a flicker of suspicion. All three of them expired on the same day. I hadn't realized he'd been using multiple cards. The theft was even worse than I'd thought. "I'll have to look into that," I said, putting on my most distracted elderly voice. "In the meantime, perhaps you could ask your father for grocery money." "Dad doesn't have grocery money. That's why we were using your cards." The casual way he said it took my breath away. Not why I was stealing or why I made a mistake, but why we were using your cards. As if it had been a family decision all along, a shared financial burden. "Tyler," I said, setting my book down and really looking at my grandson. "Those cards were for emergencies. This is an emergency. We need food." I looked at him, truly looked at this young man, this stranger who wore my grandson's face. When had he become this person? When had he decided that other people's money was his to take? When had he stopped seeing me as his grandmother and started seeing me as just a source of income, a living inheritance? "Your father has a job," I said quietly. "I'm sure he can manage groceries. His job barely covers the mortgage and car payments, you know that. And that's my responsibility because—" Tyler stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Because you're family. Because you have money and we don't." There it was again. That word. Family. The magic word that was supposed to erase all boundaries, all personal autonomy, all sense of individual worth. "Tyler, do you love me?" The question caught him off guard. His mouth half open, a bewildered expression on his face. "What, of course I love you." Why? "Because you're my grandmother." "But do you love me as a person? Do you enjoy spending time with me? Do you care about my thoughts, my feelings, my well-being?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "That's a weird question, Grandma. Is it because love isn't just about blood relation? It's about caring for someone's happiness, wanting what's best for them, treating them with kindness and respect. I treat you fine. Do you? When you unplugged my oxygen machine, were you treating me fine?" His face flushed, a mottled red spreading across his cheeks. I was just messing around. You were messing around with my ability to breathe. And you plugged it back in after you'd made your point." Tyler stood up abruptly, a cornered animal. "Look, I'm sorry about the oxygen thing, okay? And I'm sorry about the credit cards, but we're still family, and family is supposed to help each other." I watched him pace across the living room, a restless energy about him. This young man who looked so much like David at that age, who had inherited his grandfather's kind eyes and his great, grandmother's stubborn chin, all that family DNA, and somehow he'd missed the part about basic human decency. "You're right," I said finally. My voice softer now, almost a whisper. Family should help each other. Tyler stopped pacing, hope flickering across his face. "That's why I've decided to help you learn an important lesson." The hope died, replaced by a confused frown. "What kind of lesson?" "The lesson that actions have consequences. That stealing is wrong. That threatening elderly people is wrong. That taking someone for granted will eventually backfire." "I don't understand." "You will." That evening, David came home to find Tyler in a full-blown panic about the credit cards. I listened from my room, the thin walls carrying their frantic conversation. Tyler explained that all my cards had been canceled, that the bank wouldn't tell him anything, that something was definitely wrong. "Maybe Mom's having memory problems," David said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. Not for my well-being, but for the disruption this would cause. Sometimes elderly people get confused about their finances. She seemed fine when I talked to her. Tyler countered a hint of suspicion. But she was acting weird, asking me if I loved her and stuff. "Maybe I should talk to her." "Yeah, you should. And Dad, maybe you should ask her about the will thing too. Like, make sure everything's still set up the way it's supposed to be." I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Even now, even after everything that had happened, after all the ugly truths had been laid bare, they were worried about the money. Not about me, not about my health or my happiness or my well-being. Just the money. David knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course, honey. Come in." He sat on the edge of my bed looking tired and concerned, the weight of his family's problems evident on his face. "Tyler says your credit cards aren't working. I had some issues with fraudulent charges," I said truthfully, my voice calm. "I had to cancel them and get new ones. Fraudulent charges. Someone was using them without permission. Gambling sites mostly." David's face went pale. "Mom, about that. Tyler told me he'd been using your cards, but he says he was going to pay you back." "With what money?" "He's looking for a job. He's really trying." I reached over and took my son's hand, a gesture I'd done countless times throughout his life. "David, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you remember when you were Tyler's age?" He smiled faintly. "Of course. Do you remember how you treated me and your father?" David was quiet for a moment, a rare moment of genuine introspection. "I was respectful. I worked hard. I never would have done what Tyler did." "No," I agreed softly. "You wouldn't have." "So what's different?" "I don't know, Mom. Things are different now. Kids are different. The economy is different. But basic morality isn't different, is it? Stealing is still stealing. Disrespect is still disrespect." David squeezed my hand, then pulled it away. "I know Tyler made mistakes, but he's still my son and I'm still your mother." "Of course you are. Then why does Tyler's relationship to you matter more than mine does?" David pulled his hand away, a defensive gesture. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Tyler steals from me. Threatens me. Treats me like a burden. And you want to protect him from consequences. But when I try to protect myself, I'm the problem." "Mom, nobody said you were the problem." "Nobody had to say it, David. You've shown me exactly where I stand in your family's priorities." I could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between his love for me and his protective instincts toward Tyler. And I could see which side was winning. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, finally, his voice laced with defeat. "I want you to treat Tyler like the adult he is. I want you to let him face the consequences of his choices. And I want you to remember that I'm your family too." David stood up slowly, the air heavy with unspoken words. "I'll talk to him again. Will you, David? Or will you just find new ways to excuse his behavior?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. After he left, I made my final phone call to Patricia at Sunset Manor. I'd like to move in tomorrow. I told her, my voice clear and firm. Tomorrow? That's very short notice. I know, but I'm ready to start my new life. Monday morning came sooner than they expected. Monday morning I was gone before anyone woke up. The taxi arrived at 60 a.m. Just as we'd arranged. Patricia met us at Sunset Manor with a wheelchair and 2 staff members to help move my few belongings. By 80 a.m., I was settled in my new apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window, my oxygen concentrator humming quietly in the corner, a gentle, comforting presence. My few precious possessions were arranged on the shelves. Familiar anchors in a new world. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly, deeply. Freely. I'd left a letter on the kitchen table at David's house. Short and simple. I've moved to an assisted living facility where I'll be more comfortable. My lawyer will be in touch regarding financial matters. Please don't try to contact me until you're ready to have an honest conversation about respect and family. I didn't leave the address. The first call came at 9:30. David's number flashing on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, what the hell is going on? Where are you? Call me back immediately. The second call came from Linda 10 minutes later. Her voicemail was less angry, more worried. Margaret, please call us. We're scared something's happened. I didn't call them back. Not yet. Life at Sunset Manor is peaceful. I've found a routine that suits me, a gentle rhythm that soothes my soul after months of quiet tension. The staff here, from Patricia to the kind young nurses, treat me with genuine respect. They call me Mrs. Patterson, listen when I speak, and anticipate my needs without making me feel like a burden. I eat well, sleep soundly, and have discovered a surprising joy in the simple act of sitting in the garden, watching the birds, or joining in on a game of bridge with the other residents. There's a quiet camaraderie here, a shared understanding among people who have lived long lives, seen much, and perhaps, like me, learned a thing or two about what truly matters. Melavier Charles handled the financial fallout with typical efficiency. David and Tyler were, as expected, furious. They called him relentlessly, demanding to know where I was, what I'd done with my money, accusing me of being tricked or manipulated. Charles, bless his stoic heart, simply stated that I was of sound mind, had made my own decisions, and that my financial affairs were now private. He delivered the news about my will, and that I imagine truly broke their illusions. The bulk of my estate, the money Tyler believed was his birthright, will now go to the American Heart Association and to charities that support elderly victims of family abuse. Minyetsa Sara. The one who calls me every Christmas will receive a modest but significant sum, enough to help her family without burdening her. She was genuinely touched, sending me a heartfelt letter full of tears and gratitude, never once mentioning money until I had. That, you see, is family. David did try to contact me directly a few more times. His messages swung between anger, guilt, and a strange, almost childlike plea for me to come home. He even suggested family counseling, a desperate attempt to patch up a chasm too wide to bridge. Tyler never called me directly. His attempts were always through David. Always about the money. Always about what he felt he was owed. He now works a series of minimum wage jobs, struggling to keep a roof over his head, learning. I hope the hard lessons of consequence and self-reliance. David and Linda are still struggling financially. Without my emergency fund, the house is a constant stressor, a heavy weight. I hear through the grapevine from a mutual friend that they're considering downsizing, that their carefully constructed life is showing cracks. It's not a joyous triumph for me, simply a natural outcome. This isn't about revenge, not truly. It's about quiet empowerment, about reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my peace of mind, my very breath. I learned that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that free you. I learned that family isn't just blood. It's respect, kindness, and unwavering support. And when those are absent, even the deepest ties can unravel. I don't feel anger anymore, just a profound sense of clarity. I am 75 and I am finally breathing freely. My advice to anyone facing similar betrayals: listen to that quiet voice inside you, the one that tells you when something is wrong. Protect your peace. Protect yourself. Because sometimes the only person who will truly take care of you is you. And that in itself is a beautiful and powerful thing.